Welcome to Lawyers Who Care, the video show podcast that highlights attorneys who go above and beyond for their clients. And on each episode, we will meet a new lawyer and they will share stories of when they went beyond legal counsel for the benefit of their client. My name is Andrew Samalin. I'm the principal of Samalin Wealth, a nationally recognized wealth management firm for lawyers, their firms, and their clients. And let's applaud Lawyers Who Care and learn from them. Today, my guest is Tricia Dunlap. She is the managing partner of Dunlap Law, PLLC, in Richmond, Virginia. And Tricia's practice primarily focuses on business and corporate law, helping clients to navigate high growth and risk. Welcome, Tricia.
Hi, good morning. Thanks.
So, Tricia, tell us how you came to your profession.
So it was a bit of a winding road. I had dreamed of going to law school for a long time, 20 years to be exact. And in 2008, I made that leap. I had been a high school government teacher and I was a single mom. And I left teaching for law school in August of 2008. You might recall what happened in the economy in October of 2008.
As a financial advisor, I'd prefer to forget.
I would too, as someone who took out the first round of student loans and then realized she'd left the safest profession from which I would never have been fired for a lot of uncertainty. It was a really scary time, but you know, fear is a powerful whip, and I worked really hard. And then you know, the question became, what do I want to do with this very expensive degree, and how did that sort of marry up with my first career? And it took some time.
So you were balancing a whole host of things at that time. You were facing an oppressive, great financial crisis. You were facing single parenthood. You were facing a seismic shift between the safety of a teaching position in a presumably public school into this huge, great unknown of not only a new profession, but that of an entrepreneur.
Yes.
How did you reconcile all of that?
One day at a time, you know, taking it with one decision at a time, you know, trying to do sort of the next right thing, and getting used to being afraid. Some people say, oh, well, I'm fearless. Well, I'm not fearless. I just sort of recognize the fear and do it anyway. I don't know if that's the same thing, but the outcome was, I guess, the same.
And that is now almost 18 years later. Your kids are much older. Do they recognize the bravery?
They do. They do, yes. And my son, who's the younger of the two, he started middle school the year I started law school. So, you know, he really was in the trenches with me. You know, I'd be on the sidelines of his baseball games, editing law review articles. And he was patient through all of that, and they're both very proud of me now. So that's nice.
Excellent.
You know, they're grown now.
Gotcha. And you said you had a wonderful client story that you wanted to share with us.
I do. So, you know, one of the things I loved about being a high school government teacher was that I really felt connected to this nation that we have, to the Constitution and the heritage and the really amazing story of America. And so after I got my law degree, the question really became, how am I going to use it? You know, and I went to big law for a little while because I had some student loans to pay off. And so I needed to do some time, and I learned a lot from that. I was at a fantastic firm. It was great. But ultimately, what I really ended up loving was working with the small business clients. And over time, what I realized is, small businesses are so essential to the health and the democracy that we live in, because they fragment economic and social power, you know? And so as a business and corporate lawyer for business owners, small business owners, family-owned businesses, I am still a teacher, and I am still very much aligned with my first career. And so all of my favorite client stories are stories around education, you know, and how I've helped clients really understand the issues that they're facing so that they can make good decisions. It shouldn't be me making the decision. It should be the client making the decision based on the education I have helped them, understand. So I'm happy to talk about a specific client if you'd like.
This is your time.
Okay. So I have permission actually to talk about this client, and he really is a visionary, and still doing very good work. But his story began in about 2007, 2008. You might be familiar with a type of corporate form called a benefit corporation. And benefit corporations are companies that exist to make a profit for their shareholders, but also to go beyond that and to create a benefit for society or the environment or, for their stakeholders, their broader class of stakeholders. So in probably 2018 or 19, I began working with Michael Perron, who had founded Impact Makers in 2007. And the business model behind Impact Makers was not just to give all profits to charity, like a Newman's Own kind of model, but to actually give equity to charity. So, which is a complicated thing to do in corporate law. And the lawyer he had been working with, or that Impact Makers had been working with before me, had set up a corporate structure that was pretty complex in order to achieve this goal. The ultimate vision was that someday Impact Makers would be acquired. And when it was acquired, the big payout would go to two public charitable foundations that are in the Richmond metro area. And so the idea was that as this company grows and becomes more valuable, ultimately the entire community will benefit when it's acquired. There were some hiccups along the way. And as often happens, members of the board of directors began to fall out of alignment with that vision and with the corporate governance structure that had been set up before me. That created a tremendous amount of tension between Michael, who was the CEO at the time, and also a member of the board, and also a member of a holding company board that was holding the shares in trust, essentially, for these two charities. It was a really complicated corporate structure. At any rate, there was a lot of tension, and there was a breach, basically, of trust, of working together, and Michael lost control of the company that he had founded, and the company was really at risk of being pulled away from the mission that it was committed to in its charter documents, in its corporate documents. And working with another attorney in Virginia named Tom Wolfe, who is a legendary litigator, Tom Wolfe and I brought a legal complaint in circuit court in the city of Richmond. And it was the first benefit enforcement proceeding in the United States. And the way a benefit enforcement proceeding works is it's essentially requiring the company to adhere to the corporate governance commitments that have been made in its charter documents. And it was the first claim of its kind in the United States at the time. And because I'd been working with Michael and Impact Makers, and I really knew the facts of this case. Like, I knew the facts of this case better than I knew my own name, practically. You could wake me up in the middle of the night and I could recite the facts of the case from a dead sleep kind of thing. And so I wrote the complaint, and it was a very challenging complaint to write. It was long. We had multiple counts. It was both a direct claim, which means it was a direct lawsuit against some of the directors. And it was also a derivative suit, which means that we were bringing suit in the name of the company itself. So essentially the company was suing some of the directors for a breach of fiduciary duty and for what are called ultra vires acts, which are illegal acts under Virginia code. It was I mean, this is a geeky lawyer thing to say, but it was so much fun to write because it was just super complicated. And there were so many different legal issues to kind of tease out in that complaint. And we really wanted to tell the story of what had happened here so that when the judge read the complaint, he would understand the arc of the history. We filed the complaint and we settled the case 40 days later. Like literally the 40th day, we had a verbal settlement. We still had to, of course, document that, memorialize that, which that was also a fun agreement to write. And the settlement that we reached restored the mission. It rolled back many of the changes that the board had made after they had fired Michael. And it restored what we considered to be the integrity of the overall mission of Impact Makers as a company. However, Michael was still not restored as an officer. So he still did not have, control. He was a member of the board and he was still a member of the board of the holding company. But he didn't have the control that he had had prior to the board exercising the actions that they did. So the next step after we settled settled the lawsuit was to come up with a strategy that would put Michael back at the helm of the business he had founded. So because he really was still very mission driven to make sure that Impact Makers, just realized the dream of growing, becoming successful, becoming acquired, and then having the community benefit from that equity. So it took about a year of strategy and of planning, and really, I needed to really understand the bylaws, the levers of power that we had access to in the bylaws. I had to really understand how members of the board could roll off at the end of their terms, how they could be replaced and be replaced with board members who understood what Michael was trying to do. So it was a long-term strategy, and Michael and I worked together over the course of about a year. And then in September of 2020, enough new board members were in place that they voted to return him as an officer of the company. And he served as interim CEO for a while. And now he's the chief mission officer of the company. And so to me, that is, that's an example of a case where I really had to dive in, and so much of the advice to lawyers is to try not to get emotionally engaged with your clients. We have to maintain our objectivity. We have to maintain our ability to think and reason and to give sound legal advice without, an emotional bias to it. But you also have to care. That's the name of this podcast. So it's perfect. It's a perfect story for this. You have to care about the outcome. You have to care about the mission and the goal and the belief that your client is so invested in, and Michael is really typical of all of our clients. Almost every client I can think of that we have is somebody who has put everything on the line for this business or this nonprofit that they are building. And it's their life. And so, we want to be right there in the foxhole with them, so to speak, as a long-term partner, helping them to figure out, how to protect what they're building, sell it when they're ready, if that's the case, or have a succession plan if you're a nonprofit.
By the way, have they sold?
They have not yet. No. There's any business that goes through that kind of disruption, that the thing about running a business is disruption is the enemy of profits. It's the enemy of success, which as a lawyer, my goal is to prevent disruption and to put you on a path of no disruption, because that's how you get momentum. That's how you become profitable. That's how you grow and scale. And the level of disruption that impact makers suffered was tough, and
When do they
it's
expect
had
to
to come
go?
back.
When do they expect to get the liquidity event?
Well, they actually had a bit of a liquidity event last year with a merger, and that's positioned them for additional growth. And I'm not quite sure what the strategy is for the next step, but we helped with the merger, and we'll be there whenever they need us. We're their long-term partner, so
Awesome.
I love working with Michael and his vision. He's a brilliant, passionate man who has ideas about the world and how it should work that not everybody's going to agree with, but it's his vision and he's committed to it, and I just respect people like that.
Wonderful. By the way, everyone, thanks to my guest Tricia Dunlap of Dunlap Law. Tricia, can you provide your contact information to our audience, please?
Yes, so you can find me on LinkedIn, of course. I'm just Tricia Dunlap on LinkedIn, and you'll recognize the headshot because the silver curly hair is memorable. And you can also find us on our website, which is Dunlap Law P, as in professional, LC.com, DunlapLawPLC.com. And we also have an Instagram, which is Dunlap Law, and a Facebook page, which is Dunlap Law. And we have a LinkedIn page, which is Dunlap Law. So we're easy to find on all of that. And I'd love to hear from everybody.
Wonderful. This has been the Lawyers Who Care video show podcast that highlights attorneys who go above and beyond for their clients. And Tricia is certainly a fine example of that. If you're an attorney or know one who does go above and beyond, feel free to reach out to us, 914-666-6600. Number again, 914-666-6600. Tricia, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your story.
Thanks, Andrew. I appreciate the time.